The Life of Nichiren Daishonin. Nichiren Daishonin was born on the 16th day of the second month, 1222, in the village of Kataomi on the eastern coast of Awa province in present-day Chiba prefecture. His family made their living by fishing. As Nichiren Daishonin said in Letter from Sado, he was the son of a Chandala family. The Chandala are the lowest group in the Indian class system, comprising such professions as fisherman, jailer, and butcher. Nichiren Daishonin is acknowledging that his origins were of the humblest kind. He lived in the fishing village until the age of 12, when he left home to study at a nearby temple called Seichoji. In those days, temples were the only place where common people could learn reading and writing. Young Nichiren became interested in and studied Buddhism at Seichoji, which belonged to the Tendai school. There he was placed under Dozenbo, a senior priest of Seichoji, and received instruction not only in Tendai doctrines, but in true word and pure land ones as well. He was particularly concerned about the bewildering multiplicity of Buddhist schools and the doctrinal contradictions within the Buddhist canon. He was convinced that one sutra among the many that existed must represent the ultimate truth. He began to wonder where he could find that truth. Another concern was the fundamental problem of life and death, which he had wished to solve since his early years. He came to realize that the answer could only be found in Buddha's enlightenment. In the temple's hall of worship, there was a statue of Bodhisattva's space treasury. Nichiren prayed before the statue to become the wisest man in Japan, and his prayer was answered when, as he wrote later, the living Bodhisattva space treasury bestowed upon him a great jewel of wisdom. At that moment, he awakened to the ultimate reality of life and the universe. But in order to reveal this enlightenment to the people of the latter day of the law, he had to systemize his ideas in relation to the whole spectrum of the Buddha's teachings. At the age of 16, he resolved to be ordained and took religious name Zeishobo. Sometime later, he took leave of his teacher Dozenbo and went to Kamakura to further his studies. There, he delved into the teachings of the Pure Land and Zen schools. Then, he left for Western Japan where he went to Mount Hei, the center of the Tendai school and of Buddhism in general, and later to Mount Koya, the headquarters of the True Word School, and to other important temples in the Kyoto and Nara areas. After some 10 years of study at Mount Hei and elsewhere, he concluded that the true teachings of Buddhism are to be found in the Lotus Sutra. The lotus represents the heart of Shakyamuni Buddha's enlightenment. All other sutras are mere expedients leading up to the lotus. He returned to Seichoji in 1253. By that time, he had chanted Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, which he regarded as the key for all people to unlock the treasure of the enlightenment hidden in their hearts. At noon, on the 28th day of the 4th month, he propounded his doctrine at the temple in the presence of his teacher and other priests. Then he declared that none of the pre-Lotus Sutra teachings reveals the Buddha's enlightenment, and that all the schools based on those teachings are misguided. He stated that the Lotus Sutra is supreme, and that Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, the essence of the Lotus Sutra, is the only teaching that can lead the people of the latter day of the law to enlightenment. Few in the audience understood the meaning of Nichiren Daishonin's first sermon, and some responded negatively, since it appeared to be an attack upon their own religious beliefs. The steward of the region, Tojo Kanenobo, a fanatic follower of the Pure Land school, took steps to harm the Daishonin. When the Daishonin managed to escape, he resolved to go to Kamakura to preach. He changed his name to Nichiren, Sun Lotus. In the 8th month of 1253, he settled in a small dwelling at Nagoi, the southeast section of Kamakura. At his dwelling and at the homes of supporters, He began to tell people about the teachings of the Lotus Sutra. On occasion, he visited temples in the city to debate with their chief priests. He denounced the beliefs of the Pure Land school, which teaches that salvation can be gained merely by invoking the name of Amida Buddha, and also attacked Zen for its rejection of the sutras. His attacks angered not only religious leaders but government authorities as well, since the latter were in many cases ardent patrons of the Pure Land and Zen schools. Soon he faced fierce opposition, though he continued his efforts to win converts. It was in those early years of propagation that such major disciples as Shijo Kingo, Tokijonin, and Ikegami Monenaka were converted. Beginning in 1256, Japan suffered a series of calamities: storms, floods, droughts, earthquakes, and epidemics inflicted great hardship upon the nation. In 1257, a particularly severe earthquake destroyed many temples, government buildings, and homes in Kamakura, while in 1259 and 1260, severe famine and plague ravaged the populace. Nichiren Daishonin believed that the time had come for him to explain the basic cause of these catastrophes. He consulted the Buddhist canon to assemble incontrovertible proof of the cause and wrote a treatise titled "On Establishing the Correct Teaching for the Peace of the Land." Around that time, he met an occultist called Hokibo, who was so impressed by the Daishonin that he became his disciple. Later, the Daishonin named him Nikko, and Nikko became his successor. The most powerful man in the country was Hojo Tokiyori, a former regent of the Kamakura shogunate, who had retired to Saimyoji, a Zen temple, but still held power. On the 16th day of the 7th month, 1260, Nichiren Daishonin presented to Tokiyori the treatise he had completed. In it, he attributes the cause of the recent calamities to the people's slander of the correct teaching of Buddhism and their reliance on false doctrines. The worship of Amida Buddha, he asserts, is the source of such slander. The nation will know no relief from suffering unless the people renounce their mistaken beliefs and accept the teachings of the Lotus Sutra. Quotes from the Golden Light, Medicine Master, Benevolent Kings, and Great Collection Sutras are included to substantiate these assertions. These sutras mention various calamities that will befall any nation hostile to the correct teaching. Of the 7 mentioned in the Medicine Master Sutra, 5 had already struck Japan. The Daishonin predicts that if the authorities persist in turning their backs on the correct teaching, the 2 remaining calamities, foreign invasion and internal strife, will strike the nation as well. Tokiyori and the government officials appear to have taken no notice of the treatise. However, when word of its contents reached the followers of the Pure Land school, they were incensed. A band of them swarmed the Daishonin's dwelling, intent on taking his life. This is known as the Matsubagayasu persecution. The Daishonin narrowly escaped with a few disciples, but his sense of mission would not allow him to stay away from Kamakura for long. In less than a year, he was back in Kamakura to resume his preaching. The priests of Pure Land School, alarmed at his success in attracting followers, contrived to have charges brought against him by the Kamakura government. The regent at the time was Hojo Nagatoki, whose father was Shigetoki, a lay priest who built Gokurakuji Temple, and a confirmed enemy of the Daishonin. Without investigation or trial, Nagatoki accepted the charges, and on the 12th day of the 5th month, 1261, ordered Nichiren Daishonin banished to the desolate coast along the Izu Peninsula. This was the first government persecution suffered by the Daishonin. Izu was a stronghold of the Pure Land School, An exile there clearly placed the Daishonin in great personal danger. Fortunately, however, he was taken in by Funamori no Yasaburo, a local fisherman, and his wife, who treated him with great kindness. Later, he won the favor of Ito Sukemitsu, the steward of the area, who became a believer in his teaching when he successfully prayed for the steward's recovery from illness. In time, the government, apparently at the instigation of the former regent Hojo Tokiyori, issued a pardon, and Nichiren Daishonin returned to Kamakura in the second month of 1263. In the autumn of 1264, Nichiren Daishonin, concerned about his aged mother, returned to his home in Awa. He found his mother critically ill. His father had died earlier, but he prayed for her recovery, and she was able to overcome her illness and live nearly 4 years longer. Unfortunately, word of his return reached the steward, Tojo Kagenobu. When the Daishonin and a group of followers set out to visit Kudo, a supporter in the area, they were attacked by Tojo and his men at a place called Matsubara in Tojo. Although the Daishonin escaped death, he received a sword wound on his forehead, and his left hand was broken. This is known as the Komatsubara persecution. In 1268, the foreign invasion that Nichiren Daishonin had predicted seemed about to materialize. That year, as mentioned earlier, a letter from the Mongols arrived in Kamakura demanding that Japan acknowledge fealty to Kublai Khan. The Japanese leaders realized that the nation faced grave danger. Construction of defensive fortifications was immediately undertaken in Kyushu on the coast facing Korea, and every temple and shrine in the country was ordered to offer prayers for the defeat of the enemy. Nichiren Daishonin, who had returned to Kamakura, was convinced that it was time for him to act. He sent 11 letters of remonstration to top-ranking officials, including the regent Hojo Tokimuni, the deputy chief of military and police affairs Heino Seimonojo, and the two most influential priests in Kamakura at the time, Doryu of the Zen school and Ryokan of the True Word Percept school. These letters briefly restated the declaration made on establishing the correct teaching, that unless the government embraced the correct teaching, the country would suffer the final two disasters predicted in the sutras. All 11 men chose to ignore the warnings. In 1271, the country was troubled by persistent drought. The government, fearful of famine, ordered Ryokan, the well-known and respected chief priest of Gokurakuji Temple, to pray for rain. When Nichiren Daishonin learned of this, he sent a written challenge to Ryokan, offering to become his disciple if the latter succeeded in bringing on rain. If he failed, however, Ryokan was to become the Daishonin's follower. Ryokan accepted the challenge, but in spite of his prayers and those of hundreds of assistant priests, no rain fell. Instead, Kamakura was struck by fierce gales. Ryokan not only did not become a disciple of the Daishonin, but actually began to plot against him in collusion with Heino Seimonojo. Ryokan and the Zen priest Doryu both headed temples that had been founded by high officials of the Hojo family. Though the founders had died, their wives still exercised strong influence within the government. Ryokan and Doryu aroused the anger of these women by telling them that the Daishonin, in his letters of remonstrance, has spoken disrespectfully of their deceased husbands. Eventually, as a result of the machinations of the priests, a list of charges against the Daishonin was submitted to the government. On the 10th day of the 9th month, 1271, Heino Seimonojo summoned Nichiren Daishonin to appear in court to answer the charges. This marked the beginning of the second phase of official persecution. The Daishonin refuted false charges and repeated his predictions of foreign invasion and strife within the ruling clan. 2 days after the investigation, Heino Seimonojo and his soldiers burst into the Daishonin's dwelling. Though innocent of any wrongdoing, the Daishonin was arrested and it was decided to banish him to the island of Sado. However, Some high-ranking officials planned to have him beheaded at Tasukonochi on the outskirts of Kamakura. Nichiren Daishonin and his followers believed that his death was at hand, but at the last moment the sudden appearance of a luminous object in the sky so terrified the soldiers that they could not kill him. Thereafter, the Daishonin began to behave as the Buddha of the latter day of the law. A detailed description of these dramatic events in the Daishonin's own words can be found in the letter entitled "The Actions of the Votary of the Lotus Sutra". In the 10th month of 1271, Nichiren Daishonin, accompanied by warrior escorts, sailed across the Sea of Japan to Sado, his place of exile, along with Nikko and a few other disciples. They were quartered in a dilapidated hut, in an area where corpses of paupers and criminals were abandoned. They were short of food and clothing, and had no fire to keep them warm. Huddling in skins and straw mantles, they somehow managed to survive the first winter. In the first month of 1272, in response to a challenge from priests in the area, Nichiren Daishonin engaged in a religious debate with representatives of other Buddhist schools, who had gathered from around Sado and from as far away as the mainland. During what has become known as the Shukahara debate, he completely refuted their doctrines and demolished their positions. The situation on Sado improved somewhat for the Daishonin as he began to receive offerings of food and clothing from local people who had converted to his teachings. However, he faced constant hostility from the priests and lay believers of other schools. His time was devoted mainly to preaching and writing. Many of his most important works, including The Object of Devotion for Observing the Mind and The Opening of the Eyes, date from this period. On the 18th day of the second month, 1272, a ship reached Sado Island bringing news that fighting had broken out in Kamakura and Kyoto. It was a power struggle within the Hojo family. The Daishonin's prophecy of dissension within the ruling clan had come true. And before long, the second disaster he has prophesied, foreign invasion, became more likely as the Mongols repeatedly sent envoys demanding submission. In the second month of 1274, the regent, Hojo Tokimuni, who had never completely agreed with the severe treatment accorded to the Daishonin, revoked the edict of banishment. And on the 26th day of the third month, 2 years and 5 months after he was exiled, Nichiren Daishonin returned to Kamakura. On the 8th day of the fourth month, Nichiren Daishonin was asked to appear before the military tribunal. Heino Seimonojo was the presiding official, as he had been 3 years earlier when charges were brought against the Daishonin. But this time, he behaved with reserve and politeness. In reply to questioning concerning the possibility of a Mongol attack, the Daishonin stated that he feared an invasion within the year. He added that the government should not ask the true word priests to pray for the destruction of the Mongols, since their prayers would only aggravate the situation. An old Chinese text says that if a sage warns his sovereign 3 times and still is not heeded, he should leave the country. Nichiren Daishonin had 3 times remonstrated with the rulers, predicting crisis, once when he presented on establishing the correct teaching. Again at the time of his arrest and near execution at Tasukonochi, and once more on his return from Sado. Convinced that the government would never heed his warnings, he left Kamakura on the 12th day of the 5th month, 1274. He settled in a small dwelling at the foot of Mount Minobu in the province of Kai, present-day Yamanashi Prefecture. Because of the remoteness of the region, his life in Minobu was far from easy. His followers in Kamakura sent him money, food, and clothing, and occasionally went in groups to receive instructions from him. He devoted much of his time to writing, and nearly half of his extant works date from this period. He also spent much time lecturing and training his disciples. In the 10th month of 1274, 5 months after Nichiren Daishonin moved to Minobu, the Mongols launched the attack described earlier. In a letter to one of his followers, the Daishonin expressed his bitter disappointment that his advice had been ignored, for he was convinced that, had it been heeded, the nation would have been spared much suffering. During this period, Nikko was successful in making a number of converts among the priests and lay people of Asuhara village. The priests of a Tendai temple in the area, angered at his success, began harassing the converts. Eventually, they arranged for a band of warriors to attack a number of unarmed farmers of the convert group and arrest them on false charges of chivalry. 20 of the farmers were arrested and tortured, and 3 were eventually beheaded. The incident, known as Asuhara persecution, was significant because, whereas earlier persecution had been aimed mainly at the Daishonin, this time it was his followers who were targeted. In spite of the threats of the authorities, however, the farmers persisted in their faith. Nichiren Daishonin was thus convinced that his disciples and lay followers were now strong enough in faith to risk their lives for the mystic law. By his 61st year, the Daishonin was failing in health. Feeling that death was near, on the 8th day of the 9th month, 1282, he left Minobu for Hitachi. When he reached the residence of Ikegami Monenaka, in what is today a part of the city of Tokyo, he found he was too ill to continue. Many of his followers, hearing of his arrival, gathered at Ikegami to see him. On the morning of the 13th day of the 10th month, 1282, surrounded by disciples and lay believers reverently chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, he peacefully passed away.